Hello friends, I'm Conrad and welcome to Bad Guy Breakdowns, the series where we look at the most iconic villains to grace the silver screen. Times are tough out there at the moment. Cost of living prices are through the roof, the news is nothing but bad, and politicians only seem interested in making themselves and their friends rich. What are us normal people supposed to do to keep the wolves from the door? Have you thought about crime yet? That's right friends, crime! The fastest growing industry in America, and we're looking for ambitious go-getters just like you. Now, I know what you're thinking. Conrad, I'm 17, it's already too late for me to change career. And to that I say, why not come on down to old Detroit, the crime capital of America, and talk to one of our fully qualified underbosses about an exciting new opportunity in the world of violent street crime. Give us half an hour and we'll give you the world. Or, more accurately, the tools with which to take the world for yourself. Old Detroit, it's where crime pays. Huh? What happened? I blacked out. Did I intro the Clarence Boddicker video yet? RoboCop. That's what we're talking about today. He's a guy, you know, he has a little thigh pocket for his gun. He's not a great cop. Anyway, let's get into the villainy.
RoboCop. Who is he? What is he? Where does he come from?
RoboCop is a movie that shouldn't have been made. It's a dark, violent satire of American police and business with a concept straight out of a cheap B-movie but a blockbuster budget and a title that sounds like a child thought of it, which was handed to a non-American auteur director to make. So many things about that should have tripped up the making of it, but for whatever reason, they didn't. It was created by a junior executive at Universal Pictures called Edward Neumeier, who hated his job so much that he started writing a script about robots, which is honestly the kind of career progression that I lie awake at night dreaming of. He would work with fellow fledgling screenwriter Michael Miner, who, in Edward's own words, came through the door when he was writing and said,
"Oh, you want to write a script about a robot? I like robots."
And that was enough to get him on board. Yes, seriously. Neither responded when I emailed them asking if I could have a job too, which is horseshit because I also like robots. But Miner brought some great ideas to the table.
And I was playing with an idea called Super Cop about a character who has an accident and then is hooked up to an appliance that enhances his powers.
Okay. Alright, well, it's it's a jumping off point, I guess. Now, in case it's not clear, I am joking when I imply either of these two were anything less than great screenwriters. The screenplay for RoboCop is absolutely the one thing that was the saving grace of the movie before it began shooting. The title gives it the first impression of a cheap sci-fi movie, and the concept in less talented hands would have been completely stupid. But the raw satire that Miner and Neumeier filled it with is almost peerless and still very relevant today. And Orion Pictures, fresh off of producing James Cameron's Terminator and clearly in the mood for more dystopian robot fun, saw the value in it. But they might have been the only ones, because no one wanted to direct this movie. Everyone they asked in Hollywood figured it would be a career killer. Even Verhoeven initially said no. So, when I say that RoboCop is a movie that shouldn't have been made, you perhaps understand what I mean now. It took a lot of dedicated people to drag it to production, and even then its success was an enormous surprise. And maybe you'll also have an inkling of what I mean when I say that Clarence Boddicker is a villain that just shouldn't work. But my word, does he.
You probably don't think I'm a very nice guy, do you?
There's an old quote I love that pretty much sums up my opinion of Boddicker. Beware an old man in a profession where men die young. Now, Kurtwood Smith was actually only 44 when he played the role, funnily enough only 4 years older than star Peter Weller. But I don't think it's being unkind to the man when I say that he comes across as older. I would say late 40s, possibly well into his 50s. Much older than Joe Cox, Leon Nash, Steve Min and Emil Antonowski, despite their actors all being fairly close in age with the exception of Emil. It's the balding head, the skinny physique and the bookish glasses that do it, I think. This man looks like he should be the father figure in some kind of light-hearted period sitcom, more at home working a grill than a shotgun, or listening to a Steely Dan record? Moonlighting as a dancer between his jobs at a hardware store? Okay, so honestly, I've never actually seen that 70s show, I just know that Kurtwood Smith is in it and plays a dad. So you'll need to insert your own memories of it into this segment. Here is a 3-second gap where you can do so. I've provided an image of John Travolta to help set the tone. The point is that this man simultaneously looks absolutely nothing like the cruel leader of a violent gang and also somehow the baddest motherfucker in the room. And RoboCop is a movie full of dudes who typically played nice guys turning up and proving they can be absolute villains. Ronnie Cox, who played OCP scumbag Dick Jones, made a career as a smiling family man prior to this movie. And his performance was so great that you'd be within your rights to ask why he isn't the focus of this episode. And the answer is quite simply that as good as Dick Jones is, Clarence Boddicker is better. He's got the performance, the one-liners,
Bitches leave.
not to mention 31 bodies on him, all cops, and who knows how many others. It's unsurprising that a dude who looks as unassuming as Clarence would need to go extra hard on the violence to carve out his piece of gangland, but he honestly just seems to like killing, especially cops. There's a perverse joy he takes in inflicting pain on others, even those who work for him.
Watch this.
Wait a minute, Clarence!
And he is utterly remorseless, completely believable as the kind of bastard who would ascend to the highest ranks of the criminal underworld.
Can you fly, Bobby?
Clarence, no!
Literally the first thing we learn about this character in RoboCop is that he has been connected with the recent murder of 3 police officers, taking his total to 31. We see numbers spray painted next to the bodies in news footage suggesting that he's callously keeping score. And the message is clear. This isn't just a criminal who kills police when he has to. This is someone who takes pleasure in doing so. And more importantly, it immediately gives Kurtwood Smith a leg up in his performance. Boddicker has been established as a hugely dangerous man before we ever meet him, so when Murphy and Lewis end up on his tail without backup 25 minutes into the movie, the audience is already dreading what is about to happen. Then Smith takes the stage, and it becomes clear that he didn't need the help. He's going to elevate this character all by himself. His performance is enormous and physical. From kicking Emil for questioning him to tossing a former gang member to his death. It's a character introduction that screams, you're going to enjoy it when this guy eventually dies. And die he shall, but not before blowing some chunks off of our hero. I think RoboCop appealed to a lot of people who saw it as teenagers because of how violent it is. That's certainly what drew me to it. There's an artistry to the gore here, and a lot of that can be attributed to one man, who was able to take a scene where a cop is gunned down by gangsters and turn it into one of the most strikingly gory death scenes of any mainstream American movie that came out of the 1980s. It would be criminal to talk about RoboCop without discussing Rob Bottin.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Jesus, alright, I'm talking about him. Give me a second, will you?
Stay out of trouble.
Okay, so, Rob Bottin. He's a special effects and makeup guy of some note. By 1987, he'd worked on Star Wars, The Thing, The Fog, Legend, and Maniac, to name but a few movies. So, a diverse body of work with some really talented directors. And when Verhoeven and Orion came calling about RoboCop, he signed up. not just to do a lot of the effects, but also to design the iconic suit. Now, I could spend all day talking about RoboCop's look, about the visual metaphor of his awesome cycloptic mask or the chrome over Kevlar functionality of his armor's appearance, but I think Ed Neumeyer described it best.
If Braun, the German company, had made a knight in shining armor, that's what he would look like.
But the violence is where RoboCop really hits its stride for me. As a self-confessed fan of schlock, Bottin's work on the squibs and gore effects is close to perfect, and it supports the tone of the entire movie, as well as elevating the characters who perpetrate it. Case in point, anyone can fire off a couple of shotgun shells and look pretty cool. But in RoboCop, the first time we see Clarence Boddicker hit something, he's not just shooting a guy, he's blowing Murphy's entire fucking hand off. It's a moment of outrageous violence that crystallises our image of Clarence for the rest of the movie, and serves to underline how agonising the next few moments for Murphy must be. Because if one shot can take your entire hand off,
Well, give the man a hand.
then imagine what a few dozen would do. The prosthetic hand and arm flying off are Bottin's work, and are both exceptionally gory.
They're quite startling.
Ah! But the pièce de résistance of this scene is the animated puppet of Peter Weller that was used for Boddicker's final shot, through Murphy's head. It's wonderfully realistic and gave us the other part of the Boddicker bookends to this scene. He starts the violence, and he emphatically finishes it. Verhoeven viewed RoboCop as a story of an American Jesus, and this was his crucifixion. And, in the director's own words, Boddicker here was Satan, which, well, it isn't how the crucifixion went, but I'm certainly not going to correct him. So Bottin was bringing the proverbial heat in the form of extreme violence, and despite not really getting on with each other during filming, he and Verhoeven were surely a match made in heaven when it came to spilling blood.
I like violence, you know? I like violence in movies.
Never was this more clear than in the director's cut of RoboCop, where Paul Verhoeven restored only a handful of minutes to the movie, including in Murphy's death and in the introduction of the big bad mechanical peacekeeper Ed 209, where the, let's call it temperamental, robot guns down OCP junior executive Kinney. We really needed to get a few more seconds of Kinney being blasted to pieces in the boardroom to fully understand just how dead he was. But this scene is important for a few reasons. From a story perspective, it introduces us to Dick Jones and Bob Morton, who has spearheaded an initiative to place prime RoboCop candidates into high-risk precincts, which is just incredibly messed up. And it also gives us a first look at Ed, who will come back repeatedly throughout the RoboCop series. The stop-motion animation used to bring it to life is really impressive, and lead animator Phil Tippett, who I'm convinced was actually just Philip Seymour Hoffman, did a phenomenal job with it. And, as a super cool aside, Tippett has just released a feature-length stop-motion movie called Mad God this year, something he's been working on since the 90s. It's a heartwarming story, and it makes me so happy to see an absolute master of stop-motion animation still finding success. But anyway, Ed is supposed to serve as a dark contrast to RoboCop. Where Murphy rediscovers his humanity throughout the movie, Ed remains a machine that will kill indiscriminately, and also can't use stairs because he was designed with little forethought. But as is the case with a lot of Verhoeven movies, the satire runs very deep here. So while RoboCop might be a messianic figure and certainly a better alternative to Ed 209, he's ultimately still a pretty awful cop. When we see him patrolling the streets of Detroit on his first night in the city, he definitely kills at least one suspect when he doesn't really need to, and possibly two others rather than arrest them.
He's got killed!
In fact, the only two people that he conclusively does try to arrest, Clarence Boddicker during a drug bust and Dick Jones immediately after this, are precisely the two people that he shouldn't be trying to arrest. Just shoot them! You killed literally everyone else in that drug bust. You punched the guy who took the mayor hostage out of a window when he was pretty much subdued.
I am a cop.
Oh, come on! It's also worth pointing out that, as with his later movie Starship Troopers, The forces of the state, in this case the police, bear pretty stark fascist overtones. They drive black cars in a basement parking lot, which is just an accident waiting to happen, by the way, have become increasingly militarised, and the work they do is presented as explicitly antagonistic. There's very little mention of serving communities, and even when RoboCop does outreach work, at Lee Iacocca Elementary School, a little nod to the capitalist hellscape Miner and Newmeyer have created here, his message to them is still pretty threatening. It sets up the police as a fractured but potentially violent arm of their corporate overlords. And when RoboCop and Ed 209 come face to face for the first time at OCP headquarters, Dick Jones summons them in a manner that can only be described as very much like someone telling Lassie that there's a fire at the old mill.
Lieutenant Hitchcock on the line. There's trouble in the tower.
What is it, boy? A gunfight at the tower? Oh no, little Timmy's in there! But there is a clear divide between the quote-unquote good cops and the SWAT teams. Although I will say that the good guys really only put up the most perfunctory of protests before allowing the SWAT team to open fire on RoboCop.
Hey, wait a second! Get a cop, for God's sake!
Hitchcock, you can't do that!
We have orders to destroy it! Oh, shit! You're maniacs!
Okay, great effort. Loved the enthusiasm. It is a shame about the end result, but you'll get them next time, guys. You can see the difference in how Verhoeven and director of photography Jost Vacano shoot the police in this scene compared to earlier in the movie. The SWAT officers here wear balaclavas obscuring their faces, wield military gear, and are normally shot in silhouette with bright lights and smoke behind them. They are faceless, identityless shapes, essentially just guns to be pointed at the enemies of the state, in this case, OCP. They're a far cry from the cops we saw at Metro West earlier in the movie, who are at least presented as human. So, RoboCop is badly damaged when he tries to go up against the capitalist machine, and must then face Boddicker and friends in a final confrontation while the police of Detroit go on strike. It's him and Nancy Allen's Officer Lewis as the sacrificial lambs being offered up for slaughter, and it gives us a brilliantly exciting final confrontation. But to fully appreciate it, we need to first take a closer look at Clarence and his business associates. In the world of business, friends are hard to make and even harder to keep. Look at Bob Morton. When he leapt from this mortal coil, he wasn't surrounded by loved ones. He was alone with his killer, full of cocaine and several bullets. Is that any way to go? Clarence Boddicker seems to have learned this lesson early, surrounding himself with a wonderfully diverse stable of enthusiastic protégés. They aren't all up to the task, and the big C-man is pretty ruthless when it comes to making cuts to the crew, but the occasional social pruning lets those who survive it know how appreciated they are. And if it isn't Clarence doing the tidying up, then it's the cops, but the principle remains the same. Would Emil feel as fulfilled in his work if this guy had also made it to the end of the movie? Who even is this man? What is his name? You don't know, and nor do I. So, when the gang is refined down to Joe Cox, Leon Nash, Emil Antonowski, and Steve Min, what we're given is the A-team of organised crime in Detroit. These are our Avengers, but, you know, criminals. And in the lead up to the inevitable final clash between this team of ne'er-do-wells and our cyborg hero, there are multiple little skirmishes used to propel the plot forward through action set pieces, and give us moments of Clarence or RoboCop being awesome. First up is Emil getting the absolute shit kicked out of him at a gas station by Robo. It gives us probably the biggest explosion in the whole movie, as well as some character critical info for Murphy, and, in the subsequent scene, the introduction of Chekhov's hand data spike thing. Listen, USB-C didn't exist in 87, alright? They had to work with what they had. Leon Nash gets apprehended next in a scene I can't really include any of because he apparently hangs out in clubs where women are just walking around topless and YouTube doesn't like that, but it's only a few minutes long anyway. The real midpoint action sequence is RoboCop's raid on a cocaine factory where he kills like 100 dudes, including Steve Min, but chooses to arrest Joe Cox and Clarence Boddicker for some reason. A decision I've already expressed my displeasure with. Oh, come on! This is an awesome action sequence with RoboCop just striding through gunfire, hitting blind shots on gangsters above him on gantries and walkways. It really showcases the work that Peter Weller did with mime coach Moni Yakim for this movie. His movements are so perfectly robotic and yet still fluid. So Clarence, despite having two of his friends backing him up this time, doesn't come off super hot in this encounter. First time out, he blew Murphy's hand off and shot him in the head. That's a convincing win, but this time all that he got was tossed through a bunch of windows before ratting out his boss. We'll call the scores 1-1 at this point. Credit where it's due though, a true professional knows when they're overwhelmed and is willing to ask for help. And Boddicker is humble enough to go back to Dick Jones with his cap in hand. The end result of that meeting being
Cobra assault cannon, state of the art, bang bang.
Not to mention, he's happy to delegate the robot killing responsibilities to his boy squad. Dick gets Joe, Leon and Emil out of prison, and with scores to settle, RoboCop badly injured and armed with frankly ridiculously phallic guns, the crew set off to finish the job. We are, as an audience, spoiled when it comes to action sequences in the second half of RoboCop. The drug bust, then the clash at OCP HQ, and finally the confrontation at the steel mill where Murphy was killed all come in the space of half an hour. A result of Neumeier and Miner's screenplay cranking up the pacing and Paul Verhoeven's infectious enthusiasm for violence.
Action! Go!
Oh, look at him, like a murderous little kid on Christmas. And speaking of immature individuals with a penchant for violence, Joe Cox is the first of the gang to eat it at the steel mill, going the way of Steve Min via lots of squibbylicious bullets to the chest. He's had his car and then his lungs destroyed in the space of 24 hours, so spare a thought for Joe and his nightmare of a day. Next up is Emil, and this is a death that will linger with most people well after the movie finishes. Once again, special effects and makeup maestro Rob Bottin was at the heart of it. Wanting to replicate his earlier work on a movie called The Incredible Melting Man, Rob's intention was to capture the look of muscles and flesh drooping away from a skeleton. To do so, they took a life cast of actor Paul McCrane and then built out the hideously deformed aftermath using foam latex. The end result is, well, it's horrific in the best way possible. We don't actually see it immediately, as it's a stuntman in fairly basic makeup and not McCrane who rolls out the back of the truck after crashing it into a toxic waste vat. But that's all Paul leaving bits of himself on Ray Wise's shoulder moments later, and the final effect of Emil's body disintegrating as Clarence inadvertently runs him over with his 6000 SUX was done with a mixture of an articulated dummy wearing McCrane's suit and a pot filled with several days' worth of catering truck leftovers. Those slimy remains on the windshield of Boddicker's car are what's left of yesterday's soup. 2 down, 2 to go as far as Lewis and Murphy are concerned. Oops! Make that 1 to go as Lewis gets all squibbed up herself before demonstrating impeccable aim to vaporise Nash seconds after he nails RoboCop with a bunch of metal scraps.
I got him, Clarence! I got him!
And in a sequence that is strikingly similar to the final clash between the Terminator and the T-1000 at the end of Terminator 2, all the way up to the pole impalement, Clarence finally gets his comeuppance and Murphy his revenge, via the return of that data spike thing. Boddicker probably shouldn't have taken the time to quip here,
Sayonara, RoboCop!
but if he hadn't, then we wouldn't have got this fantastically bloody death. Kurtwood Smith does such a good job of really selling the agony of a stab to the neck as arterial blood jets out from under his hand. At this point, Robo and Lewis are pretty much victorious. All that remains is a quick trip over to OCP headquarters, a few headshots to the Ed 209 downstairs, a minor hostage situation, and Vice President Dick Jones taking the express elevator to the bottom of the building sporting a few extra holes.
These are speed holes, they make the go faster.
And that's RoboCop, a stunningly violent movie that rightly ranks as one of the funniest and best satirical action movies ever made. And to me, Clarence Boddicker is as memorable and, more importantly, quotable as any other action movie character of the 80s. His line delivery is always perfect. Not to mention the fact that, despite looking insanely outgunned by the towering superhuman who pursued him for much of this movie, he never feels like he's out of his depth. Boddicker was a great white in a world of sharks, a prince of crime, and a hero for glasses wearers everywhere. Sea Dog, you shall be missed. Thank you for joining us on Bad Guy Breakdowns. If you could leave a like, that'd be much appreciated. Let me know the ways in which Clarence inspired you to overcome your physical shortcomings. And be sure to join us next time as we head back to an era of legend. Next up is Frank in Sergio Leone's classic western Once Upon a Time in the West. Until then, I've been Conrad, and I'll see you next time.